Hello and welcome to my presentation on the Great Fire of London. In 1660, London was one of the largest cities in the West. It served as a center of commerce and during the day was a bustling scene of trade and daily activities. However, on September 2nd, 1666, the scene of economics would come to a halt as a fire started in a humble bakery would lead to the destruction of the majority of central London, and we know this fire to be the Great Fire of London. In the early morning hours of Sunday, September 2nd, a baker named Thomas Ferronier's oven would catch ablaze. The family would escape by fleeing to another roof of another neighbor. However, unfortunately, as their house was being consumed by flames, their maid would not be able to escape the fire and would unfortunately be the first casualty of the Great Fire of London. As neighbors became aware of the flames, they began to shuttle water from the nearby River Thames and nearby pumps to extinguish the flames. However, it was not enough. The fire militia would be called, but their efforts proved ineffective, and the mayor at the time, Mayor Thomas Bloodsworth, would be called in to assess the situation. When he arrived on the scene, the firemen would advise him that the buildings currently ablaze were unsalvageable and that the best thing to do was to tear them down using fire hooks to prevent the blaze from spreading. And if you look at this picture, you can see these fire hooks that they would use to pull down the thatching of the house to uh, take away as much fuel as possible from the fire. However, Bloodsworth would refuse their advice and infamously say, quote, "A woman could piss it out," referring to the fact that he believed that it wasn't a very big blaze. And then he would actually, Bloodsworth would return home after this, which was rather unfortunate. The firemen would continue their efforts, but unfortunately the blaze became uncontrollable and began to spread to other houses at an alarming rate. Many people remember Bloodsworth infamously, as it is believed that if he had followed the firemen's advice, the fire would have come under control. As I have examined the situation, I realized that his actions, while they did indeed have catastrophic results, uh, he had good reasons behind why he didn't. First of all, uh, if you looked at the fire, it probably looked pretty bad, but it hadn't spread very far yet, and I'm sure that he wanted to keep things on the down low. Also, uh, if he had torn down the houses that were already ablaze without the king's permission, he would have had to pay for the damages, and there was a high probability that his actions would have made him very unpopular, politically speaking. Little did he know that his inaction would have the same effect on a much larger scale. Bloodsworth, however, would continue to serve in the House of Commons long after the incident. However, he would never be very popular due to his involvement in the continuation of the Great Fire of London. Moving on late Sunday morning, reportedly over 300 houses have been lit ablaze. And what many people don't understand about the Great Fire of London is how quickly it spread and why it would continue to spread even with all the effort to put it out. And the first reason is that the fire had an abundance of fuel as the fire would start in a poor section of town, and most of their walls were framed and filled with dry wood. Second, the houses were all crowded together, which allowed the fire to easily spread as sparks and embers were abundant. Third, the way that the houses were designed along the tight road with overhanging jetties or roofs created a funnel which combined with the deadly high winds and dry heat at the time would create an effect called a firestorm, which, as you can see in this picture, creates very high flames and much harder flames than a normal fire would. Okay. Later on Sunday afternoon, the fire continued to spread at an alarming rate, and Bloodsworth would be called out and this time would order houses to be torn down. However, it would take King Charles II, this handsome fellow over here, and his brother James, Duke of York, this man over here, before their involvement was required before anything would actually begin to get to be taken care of. Uh, they began to set up fire breaks and organize the mass demolition of homes. However, it would be some time before their work actually became effective. On Monday, the fire would spread into the financial district, and many people could be seen trying to save whatever they could scrounge from their soon-to-be destroyed businesses. As you can see by looking at this picture, it had already spread quite a distance from the initial fire at the bakery. Uh, on Tuesday, the 4th, the fire would leap past multiple barricades and would continue to destroy much of the city, including the renowned St. Paul's Cathedral. However, on Wednesday the 5th, the winds would finally drop and the barricades would finally start to take effect, and as a result, the majority of the blazes would be extinguished, and finally the king had a semblance of control again. Moving on to the aftermath and the impact of the fire, it isn't completely known how many people would actually die in the fire. However, it is rumored to be somewhere between 6 to 8 people. However, many more people would be displaced, as over 13,000 homes would be destroyed in the fire, and Charles II would be forced to try and relocate thousands of people. Much of the blame would be placed on Thomas Bloodsworth, but a large share of the blame would be wrongfully placed on foreigners, as the Second Anglo-Saxon War was in full tilt, and they provided a reliable scapegoat for the king at the time, King Charles, and it also allowed a vent for the fear of the people as they would torment any foreigners in the city at the time. Uh, it would also greatly disrupt the commerce in England as the rebuilding process began, and it would also lead to a major loss in cultural heritage as it would burn down major buildings like St. Paul's Cathedral and the Bridewell Palace. But it would also destroy thousands of records from the time that we'll never be able to see. Now, at the time, however, John Milton was working on writing the book Paradise Lost, and in 1965, there was the plague, an outbreak of the plague, and so he had more time to write the book, but he wasn't able to publish the book until 1667 because the Great Fire of London would break out in 1666, which uh, meant that people had less economic stability, which meant that they couldn't afford to publish his book, even though he only ended up selling the rights to his book for £10. Anyway, thank you for listening and watching my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a good rest of your night.